Theology. Unplugged.
What are the different types of church governance? That is a good question. The different types of church governance. There's really basically three. There's a top-down approach, and there's no top at all. There's your own top, basically, or your church is its own top. Now, the top-down approach starts with some type of head, kind of like a pyramid, and you go down to the bottom. There's only one at the top, and think of it as a pyramid-type church. That would be like the Roman Catholic Church. You have the Pope at the very beginning, then you have the cardinals under him, the archbishops under them, then the bishops under them, then the individual priests and rectors. So that is the best example of that side. Then you have the other extreme, which is the congregational or autonomous church body. That is a type of government where you say, hey, we're our own church, and we govern ourselves. Our elders and our pastor does. And so we answer only to ourselves. Basically, you've got both of these trying to solve something. Now, and both of them basically claiming to be biblical. This one over here says, hey, if you have individual types, everybody's going to do what they want, and they'll interpret the Bible how they want and just function how they want. They won't look like anybody else, and there won't be any unity with everybody else. Then you got the other side, who this side says, hey, you get corruption over here, which we all are corrupt, and things will go bad. You get corruption over here, and it will seep in and make its way through the hole, and there's nothing you can do about it, especially whenever it's like a Roman Catholic structure where you have this dogmatic infallibility of the church, and so whatever is has to stay unless you can creatively change it somehow and, act like what you solidified beforehand. The cement that dried over on the structure before didn't really dry, but problems on both sides. Then there's the one in the middle, and I don't want you to think the problems on the both sides and then I'm presenting you with the right one. That's not how I mean to present this. The one in the middle basically is kind of like this one and kind of like this one. You got small pyramids, but at the top of it, it's not one person. So this one over here is called an Episcopal type church. Don't think just of Episcopalian, even though Anglicanism, which is the same thing as Episcopalian just in Britain, and Episcopalian is Anglicanism here in America, they do have a head, but the head's not infallible. It's kind of like they don't have the drying cement the way the other one does. So maybe that would be a third type, the drying cement one, and then the wet cement Episcopal. Either way, you've got a top-down structure. The Anglicans do have a head, but he's not, like I said, he's not infallible, and he's kind of a figurehead more than anything else. But right in the middle, you have many people. This is called the presbytery government. So Presbyterianism, Reformed churches, you got a presbytery type government, individual churches in individual areas with local autonomy. And then over here, of course, you have your elders in your individual churches. You have your elders and your pastor, or your pastors / elders, or however you want to, whatever you call them, the pastors, and over here you've got your bishops, and right in the middle you got your, what do you call them? Pastors. It's the same thing in the presbytery. Pastor, that's what you would be. That's what I would be if I was a Presbyterian. I would have pastors, or I would be a pastor. Over here I'd be a priest. Now, why do you say that? Now let's get this into something else. I should not have said that, but that's too much fun. I've got to go in there. Why do you have priests over in the Episcopal? Not always, but most of the time in the Episcopal structure, you have priests. Well, because you have this situation where you have apostolic succession. Then then you have to back up and say, why do you have apostolic succession? Well, you have apostolic succession of person because you are finding continuity with each other, but also most of the time you're finding continuity with the Old Testament church or the Old Testament Israel. And so you're basically seeing yourself as the new Israel. If you see yourself as the new Israel, more than likely you'll be over here on this big pyramid or somewhere around it. And what will happen is you have this Old Testament priesthood transferred into the New Testament priesthood, even though the New Testament has a perfectly good word for priest and uses it very often, but never uses it of any of the church leaders. But at the same time, that's what it got conferred into because there was the identification that was made. And so you've got the priests who offer sacrifices in the Old Testament and represent the people to God, and then the priests who are now today, New Testament and onward, the Episcopal type church, who offer sacrifices in the New Testament, but it's a representing of the one sacrifice if you are Catholic or Orthodox, and it is a representation of the people to God, just like a priest does. One thing to remember here, this is good to think of. A priest represents the people to God. A prophet represents God to the people. Keep that in mind, and it will keep a lot of things straight. Okay, so a priest represents the people to God, and so you have confession. People come to you, and you tell them, you in a sense represent them with the forgiveness of sins like an Old Testament priest would. And then you give them penance, which is basically saying, okay, here's how you work through this. Here's how you clean up your daily life. Here's how you wash your feet after the mess up that you've done. So it's not that they confer forgiveness. Again, in the Catholic Church, they're always representing Christ, or in the Anglican Church, they're just there being kind of as a pastoral priest. But that's how it goes. You've got priests who represent the people to God in the Old Testament and in the New Testament in the Episcopal structure. In the presbytery structure or in the congregational structure, you either have pastors or elders, shepherds. There's all kinds of words in the New Testament that what are used for pastoral leadership or the leadership of the church. You have presbyteros, you have episkopos, and you have, what is the word for pastor? I can't remember. Well, you have the word for pastor, shepherd. And each one of them is different. Like the presbyteros is always a noun. So it is an elder. It's not one who elders, it's an elder. The elder is also an episkopos, and an episkopos is one who oversees. Now, an oversees, what do? They oversee. So that is a verb that is turned into a noun. So basically, you've got an elder who does, in a verb tense, what? He oversees and shepherds. So that's kind of the way. Of course, I am more of a congregationalist type person. So and I don't mind the presbytery structure. I don't think there's anything that has to marry you to one of these structures. Or we can say this one's biblical and this one's unbiblical. I do think it's more biblical, and certainly in the Bible, they used elder and or presbyteros and episkopos, elder and overseer synonymously, along with pastor as well. Although pastor is kind of a funny word because I think it's only mentioned once in this context, although they are to shepherd the people of God. And so there is a verb that is used of that. Like I said, it is simply one overseeing person or elder, the type of person he is, that is shepherding the church of God. Later on, we broke it all up. Presbyteros became a Latin word that turned into priest, and then all of a sudden you have priest introduced. Why priest all of a sudden again? Well, they're connecting it back to the Old Testament, and since in the Old Testament this is how it functioned, then probably in the New Testament this is the way it's meant to function. But the problem is whenever you begin to say this is the only biblical way to do it, that's when you get problematic. There's an elasticity to our ecclesiology, and there are different types of ecclesiologies. Here's the deal. I would tell you, in your life, do not marry to one of the three. Do not marry only to one of three. Go to each one and kind of see the differences. The further you get over here towards an Episcopal type government, the more traditional you're going to get, the more high church you're going to get, if you can think of it that way. High church, you've ever heard of that? High church, low church. Well, the more high church you're going to get, meaning the more tradition's going to be represented. Usually a lot more beauty will be represented, or kind of stuff that makes you step out of our world into a different world, maybe an ancient world, or a world that is focused upon art. I've been reading through the Old Testament right now because it's through the Bible in a year. And yesterday I was reading it and I was saying to myself, the details are incredible. I cannot believe how detailed they were. I cannot believe how committed they were to do all of this the way they did it. But most of all, I was saying, why is the Bible telling us about all this detail? There's so much beauty to it. And the people were very committed, although they lost commitment. I don't know that they ever fulfilled what they were supposed to do in any sense, the law, even for a day. But they abandoned it pretty quickly. But anyway, the rules that were given, the instructions that were given were very detailed. And they did do it at the beginning, but that is a high church minded. They're identifying with that. That's why you see the beauty. Now, the further you get over on this side, the further you get to the congregational individual church, and they say, we don't want that beauty. We don't need that beauty. That is not what the church is about. You look at the New Testament church, and what they would say is in the New Testament church, you have very simple things, people meeting in homes. What do homes look like back then? Well, that's what a church should look like. So basically, they're saying, let's do it like they did it in the New Testament. And since they did it this way in the New Testament, this way is wrong. That doesn't necessarily make this way wrong. It just means that's the way they did it in the New Testament. It's the form, not the function. There's a difference between form and function, or principle and the way in which that principle is carried out. What is the word for it? You've got form and function. Principle, precept. No, I can't remember. But anyway, so you have the low church over here. And low church simply means this, that there's not a lot of tradition tied to it. Always some tradition, but there's not a lot of tradition tied to it. They're not trying to be eye candy. They're not trying to make you step into a different world. They're not trying to build tall buildings, the biggest building in town. They're not trying to make the most beautiful sanctuaries in town. And you've probably noticed that before. They're just focused upon what you do, not what you look like. And so what you have is different types of churches and all in between, right? You've got the Presbyterian church. Sometimes it is very beautiful at a Presbyterian church. Sometimes there's a lot of tradition represented. Same thing with Episcopal, Anglican. Almost always at a Catholic church, you can have a lot of tradition, although sometimes there won't be the beauty there. They kind of work with what they got, but you know, the bigger, nicer metropolitan type churches and the bishops, they have nicer metropolitan type churches. So go to one of those. Those are beautiful. And it's always good to see these things. It's always good for you at a high church to go to a low church and see what they focus on. I bet you'll be surprised what it looks like not to rely upon tradition and just study the Bible and work on fellowship and really dig deep into understanding. And then you guys over here, go over to one of those. I guarantee you will be enamored by the tradition. You will be captivated by the beauty of it, whether it's the beauty of the church or the beauty of the liturgy. And there's something to be said about beauty. I'm not saying it's the most important thing at all. I go to a more low church type church. That is my history. That's who I am. But I love to go to high churches. I love to go to see the tradition. I identify with it. I look at it and I say, gosh, is this the way? Whenever I go to Eastern Orthodox church, I said to myself, is this the way they did it back with Chrysostom in the 4th century? Because that's the liturgy they're using. Now, obviously, it wasn't the look back at the time of Chrysostom, at least exactly. But at the same time, the liturgy is. And I love to be able to say whenever I go to a church, what I'm singing today or what I am doing here in this prayer, what prayer I'm praying, what repetition I'm repeating after the priest or the pastor. That is the same thing that they've done in this church since the 4th century. And there's a beauty to that. You're connecting to the one big body of Christ.
Theology.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for coming. I'll see you later.